Hi everybody, I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who might not know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. We've been reading through the Law of Freedom for a while now in the Spirit's book, and we are finally getting to the end of it, and hopefully we'll finish it off today, or maybe we'll finish it off next week. And we've talked about a lot of topics in the Law of Freedom, including free will and knowing your past, and many other topics and many questions on this Law of Freedom. But last week we started off this section within the Law of Freedom talking about foreknowledge of the future. So we've been talking about why we forget most things of our past, or why some people do remember glimpses and pieces of their past, but now we're talking about people who may have a prediction of the future. So we were on question 871. Since God knows everything, God knows whether a person will or will not fail in a particular trial. If that is the case, what is the need of the trial in the first place, since it cannot add anything to what God does not already know about that person? So that's a very good question, because we know that God knows everything. God is the supreme intelligence, so God knows everything. So He knows that before a trial even starts, He knows if we're going to pass it or if we're going to fail it. So they're saying, so what's the point of the trial if God already knows what's going to happen and He already knows what kind of person we are? So what's the point of us going through that trial if God already knows? And the spirits answered, you might as well ask why God did not create human beings perfect and accomplished to begin with, or why they must pass through childhood before arriving at adulthood. The purpose of a trial is not to enlighten God about what people deserve. God knows perfectly well what they deserve, but to leave them the entire responsibility for their own conduct, since they have the freedom to do or not do. Since they can choose between good and evil, a trial has the purpose of placing them before the temptation of evil, leaving them all the merit for resisting it. Also, even though God knows very well beforehand whether they will triumph or fail, out of divine justice, God can neither punish them nor reward them for an act they have not yet committed. So, in the beginning, they're kind of saying, well, this is a silly question to ask, because it's kind of like, okay, so why didn't God just make us all perfect? Well, then we wouldn't know anything less than that, and people might take advantage of being perfect, or there would be no point if we were all just created perfect. Or they're saying, it's like asking, how come we aren't just born to be adults instead of being a child and having to grow up and learn things? We have to go through this learning process, this growing up process. And for our spirit, it takes centuries upon centuries, while when we're talking about a corporeal life, just one incarnated life, it takes years for you to learn to be an infant, then a toddler, and then a youth, and then a teen, and then going on to adulthood. So even that takes years, and if we think about our spirit, it takes even longer. So it's kind of asking, it's like, basically what they're saying is, like, this is kind of a silly question to ask, because the purpose of a trial isn't for us to prove ourselves to God, because God knows who we are, and no matter what we do, even if, say I do something, but it's only to make myself seem good, God knows the true intention. So God knows everything. So we don't need to do it to prove to God who we are, because God knows who we are. But the trials are for us to improve, for us to learn, and from us to grow off that. Not for us to show off to God, because God already knows what's going to happen and what we're going to do. And instead of just saying, oh, okay, you're going to fail this, so I'm not even going to give it to you, you keep going through this trial so that when you fail it, okay, you fail it, try again, you fail it again, you fail it again, you fail it again. Once you succeed and you do choose that path of good, that better choice, then you get more credit for it, and you're going to feel better about it, because you learned more and you did more to accomplish that instead of just having it given to you. And like what they're saying here, even though God knows whether we're going to succeed or fail, he can't just be like, oh, I know you're going to succeed, so here's the prize, even though you didn't do anything. He has to, even though he knows you're going to pass this trial perfectly fine, this time it's going to be perfect, he still needs to give you that test. He still needs to give you that trial so that you know what's going to happen, so that you can know what you're being rewarded for, and it can make sense to you. Because if God just said, oh, I know you're going to pass this, here you go, here's a prize, then we wouldn't really understand what it is that we did good because we didn't do it yet. And then Allan Kardec puts in his own comment, and he says, it is the same among humans. However, capable aspirations may be and not matter how certain they are of success. They cannot be granted any diploma without first being tested, i.e., without trials. In the same way, a judge does not condemn the accused except with the proof that the crime was actually committed, and not by the prediction that the accused can or might commit such an act in the future. So, like they're saying, we can compare. This may seem like a big scale to think about, oh, how God is judging us and our relationship to God, but we can see this in little everyday examples, like to graduate, to get your diploma. Even though your teacher knows you're the best one in the class and you're always paying attention, he can't just be like, oh, I know you're gonna pass, so here you go, just pass. No, you still have to take the test, and if you are living up to your teacher's expectation, then yeah, you're gonna pass no problem. So we still have to go through that, even though our teacher knows we're gonna do fine, we're gonna do great, we still have to go through the test, because if we don't go through the test, how are we going to get a grade? How are we going to pass? And the same thing like they say, a judge condemning a criminal. Just because they think they have all these, it's like very clear that this person did this crime, they can't just go assuming it and say, oh, I know you did this crime, so let's not even do a trial. No, we have to do the trial, we have to prove it, and go through it. So we can't just skip it because we're really sure of it. We have to go through everything. And that's not really a big problem, because say it's, oh, I know you're going to pass this trial, fine. Then okay, so go through the trial, pass it fine, and then we'll move on to something else. We just have to go through that step of doing that trial and overcoming that thing. And then Allan Kardec continues, the more we reflect on the consequences that the knowledge of the future would have for humans, the more we see how wise Providence was to conceal it. The certainty of a happy event would result in inaction, an unpleasant event in discouragement. In either case, our efforts would be paralyzed. This is why the future is not shown to humans except as a goal they must reach through their own efforts. But without knowing the tribulations they must go through in order to reach it. Knowing about all the incidents that might occur along the way would deprive them of their initiative and use of their free will. They would let themselves be dragged down by the fatal slopes of events without exercising their own faculties. When the success of a matter is absurd, no one is worried about it any longer. So what they're saying here is that, think about if we didn't know what was going to happen. If we knew that something good was going to happen, then we wouldn't even try, because we'd be like, oh, something's going to happen, so I can just relax, sit here and do nothing, and that good thing's going to happen. Or if we knew something bad was going to happen, then we'd just be depressed and be like, oh, I'm not even going to try, because no matter what I do, I know something bad's going to happen. So either way, if it's good or bad, we would just sit there and do nothing and just let everything happen. So we need to be active. So that's why it's important for us to not see into the future, not know everything that's going to happen to us, because that's not the most beneficial plan of action for us. So that's why it's important that we do know our goal. We know that we're trying to get to that state of perfection, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen, because if we knew exactly what's going to happen, it would be much harder than we think to actually do it. But think about how we live today. When we don't know what's going to happen, we go through life trying things, making mistakes, learning from it, making new mistakes, and continuing to learn. So When we don't know what's going to happen, we say, oh, okay, when we're faced with a decision, we pick whichever one we think best is, and we go through those trials, and we improve on some things, and we make mistakes in other places, and try and work on those and improve those. So when we don't know what's going to happen, then we're less stressed about the future, and we're just focusing on the trials that we're going through at the moment, and we don't have to be like, oh, I know this is going to turn great, so we might be a little worried, like, oh, I have to work hard to get this, or we don't have to be discouraged about something bad that might happen because we don't know that bad thing is going to happen. And then the last section in this chapter is called A Theoretical Summary of the Driving Force Behind Human Actions. So this isn't really a question at all, actually. It's labeled question 872, but it's really just a summary of everything we're talking about and a summary of why humans do act, the force that's driving humans to act. So it's not actually a question, but it is labeled question 872. The issue of free will may be summed up as followed. Humans are not fatally led into evil. Their actions are not written beforehand. The crimes they commit are not the result of any degree of destiny. As a trial and an expiation, they can choose an existence in which they will feel induced to crime, whether through the surroundings in which they are placed, or whether through the circumstances they supervene. But they will always be free to act as they wish. Free will exists in the spirit state, in the choice of trials, and in the corporeal life, in the ability of yielding or resisting the temptations to which they have voluntarily submitted themselves. It is the duty of education to combat evil tendencies, and it will effectively do so when it is based on an in-depth study of the human moral nature. Through the knowledge of the laws that govern this moral nature, humans will manage to modify it, as intelligence is modified through education and physical constitution through bodily care. So that just summed up a lot of the basics of what we talked about what our free will is. So we know that bad things aren't just written in the stars like some people say. They're not written beforehand exactly what's going to happen and it's inevitable. No, in the spirit world, we have our free will to choose which trials we want to go through. And maybe a trial might be to be in a situation where we are exposed to crime tendencies or exposed to drug tendencies. But it doesn't mean that we're going to fall into that. We might have a high chance of it, but our trial is to steer away from that, to choose the better path when we're in that. But it doesn't mean that we're going to be destined, okay, you're pre-planned that you're going to commit this crime. No one's pre-planned to commit crime. We have the free will to act freely and do what we think is best, or sometimes we don't do what we think is best. We make a mistake and then we have to go through the trial of fixing it. So we know that not everything is written precisely of this is going to happen and this and this and this. Our whole life isn't planned out, but we have big general details in our lives that are planned out, that we planned out ourselves. So we plan to come into this certain family, or we plan to come into this town, and it might not have been planned what exact friends we were going to have or what exact schoolwork was going to be challenging for us, but we planned that, okay, we're going to have a friend that's something like this, or we're going to have one class that's going to be a little difficult. So we planned all of these little things, but how we deal with it is up to us, and how it unfolds is also up to us. Then they continue. When disconnected from matter and in the errant state, the spirit makes the choice of its future corporeal existence according to the degree of purification it has reached. It is in this, as we have stated, that its free will especially consists. This freedom is not annulled by incarnation. If the spirit yields to the influence of matter, it fails in the trial it has chosen for itself. In order to help overcome them, however, it can invoke the assistance of God and good spirits. So, again, like they were saying, when we're disconnected from matter, so when we are And in the errant state, we make the choices, the spirit makes the choices of what's going to happen in our future corporal existence. So when we're in the spirit world, we sit there and we decide, depending on how evolved we are, we get to sit there and decide, okay, I want to go through this, I want to be in this type of situation, I want to be in this type of living condition. We get to choose what we're going to go through. So that's already our free will because we're choosing that. And also, when we're incarnated, we're the ones who get to choose if we're going to be influenced by matter, if we're going to be influenced by other people, or if we're going to not be influenced by matter and go on our own and not just follow the crowd and make our own statements and follow what we believe is right. But of course, and another important thing that they add in here is that it's okay to need help to overcome these things, and we can always turn to God and the good spirits to assist us, but that can't just be like, oh, I'm going to pray and then everything's going to be fine. No, we need to pray and do our part and work harder so that we can get this assistance that we need. And then they continue. Without free will, humans would be neither guilty in evil nor meritorious in goodness. This is so true that in the world censure or praise always depend on intent, that is, on the will of individuals. Those who say will actually means freedom. Therefore, people who not seek excuses in their physical makeup for their wrongdoings without abdicting reason and the human condition itself, and without equating themselves with the brute. If this can be applied to evil, it applies to the good as well. But whenever people practice the good, they take great care to tribulate the merit of their favor. When they do not attribute it to their organs, in fact, which, notwithstanding the opinion of a few theoreticians, proves that they instinctively do not renounce the most glorious privilege of their species, freedom of thought. So here what they're saying is that if we didn't have free will, if we didn't have the freedom to choose what we were going to do on our own, then nothing we do would be bad or good. So if something good happened, you wouldn't really get credit for it because, oh, that's just what was planned for you. You didn't do anything to deserve it. That's just what was planned. So even if you did something good, it didn't have much meaning. Or if you did something bad, you wouldn't be guilty because you said, oh, that's what was planned for me, so why would I feel guilty because there's no way I could change that. So without free will, we'd be stuck in this. We wouldn't have anything to feel guilty for or anything to feel especially good about, so we wouldn't change and we'd be stuck in this condition. So especially and they say like in the society we live in today, when we do something good and we get praised and people appreciate us, then that makes us feel good emotions and we want to do more good things. Or if we do something bad, then we feel guilty and we don't have good feelings around us, and it's like yucky and we want to get away from that. So then we try to avoid doing those bad things because we don't want to have those yucky feelings anymore. So if we thought that everything was planned out beforehand, we wouldn't really have any motivation to do anything good and steer away from the bad things. And then it continues. Fatalism, as commonly understood, implies a prior and irrevocable ordaining of all the events of life, whatever their importance may be. If that were the order of things, human beings would be like machines deprived of will. Of what use would their intelligence be if they were invariably overruled in all their actions by the force of destiny? Such a doctrine, if true, would represent the destruction of all human freedom. Individuals would have no responsibility for their actions. As a result, there would be no evil, no crime, no virtue. God, being supremely just, could not chastise God's creations for wrongs that they did not depend on themselves to start with, or reward them for virtues for which they had no merit. Such a law would be further negation of the law of progress, because people who would depend on fate for everything would try to do nothing to improve their position. since they could make it neither better nor worse. So here, they're mentioning fatalism that we talked about. And fatalism is the belief that every single thing is predetermined. And as we learned, there's some things, like we were saying, maybe that you're going to be born to a certain living condition. But it's not that it has to be this and at this time. So it doesn't mean that every single exact event is planned out. There's just some general things that are planned out for us that we planned out ourselves. But if everything was planned out, then we would be like machines, because we wouldn't have free will. Every action was just already pre-planned, and that was it. So we know that that can't be true. Everything can't be planned, because then we wouldn't have any freedom to do anything. So, and we also wouldn't be responsible for our actions. So no one would be guilty because they said, oh, it wasn't me, it was just what was planned for me. And also, no one would be rewarded. No one would have good virtues, because that's also what was just planned for you. It wasn't like you earned it. It was just planned. So, and this would also go against the law of progress, because we wouldn't be progressing. We'd all just be in the same state, and some people would be higher than others for no reason. So, we know that it's not every single detail in our lives that are planned out. That's planned out. And then they continue. However, fatalism is not a meaningless word. It really does apply in regard to the position of individuals on the earth and the function they perform on it as a consequence of the kind of existence that their spirit has chosen as a trial, an expiation, or a mission. They fatally undergo all the tribulations of that existence, and all the good or bad tendencies inherent to it. But at this point, fatalism ceases, for it depends on their will to yield or to not yield to those tendencies. The details of events depend on the circumstances that humans themselves create in their deeds, and on those that Spiritism influences through the thoughts they suggest to them. So, here they're saying, fatalism isn't completely wrong, because like we were mentioning, they do have bits and pieces that we plan. We plan, okay, I need to go through the trial of poverty, or I need to go through the trial of wealth. So we didn't plan the exactly this and this and this is going to happen, but we plan these general things. Oh, I need to go through this trial. So we are going to be faced with that trial in our lives. So we have that pre-planned for us. But it is still up to us, to our free will, of how we're going to act, if we're going to succumb to the evil path, or we're going to choose the path of good, or we're going to make a mistake, and then make a mistake, and then make a mistake, and then finally correct it. So that part is up to us, the free will of how that event is going to unfold. Even if the event needs to happen, we have the free will and the freedom of action to plan, to deal with how this is going to unfold. If we're going to make a mistake and we're going to fall into a bad path, or if we're just going to overcome that trial quickly, is up to us. Then they continue. There is fatalism, therefore, in the events that are presented to people as a consequence of their choice of existence, made by their spirit. However, there can be no fatalism in the results of such events, because it may depend on them to modify the course of things through their own prudence. Furthermore, fatalism never applies to the acts of moral life. So what they're also saying here is that fatalism, this predestiny, also comes from the consequences of the choices we make. So if we do choose to go down a bad path, then fatalism, the destiny is going to be like, okay, well, if you go down this wrong path, then this is going to need to happen. Or if you break this rule, just like us, even though it's not predetermined that we break a law. No one's saying that I'm going to break a law. I might be put in the situation that I might be faced with the choice to break the law, but no one's making me break the law. That's still my own free will. But if I do break the law, then I'm going to have to pay the consequence for that. So that is predetermined. So but that doesn't apply, like they're saying, fatalism never applies to the acts of our moral life. So this is talking about physical things that we do. But our moral life, that's never, that fatalism is never going to apply to that. So we can't just plan things in such advance, because we are always changing, and we might go down an evil path here or go down a right path there, or make some mistakes here, not make some mistakes there. So we can't predetermine everything because we're always changing. We're always making different thoughts. Even right now, we're making so many different decisions in our head that are impacting our lives. And depending on the decisions we make right now, are going to change the decisions that we make later and what happens after that and what happens after that. So this predestiny can't go on for so long because there's just so many different options that we have to go down, so many different paths that we can go down. And then it continues. It is in death that people are subjected absolutely and inexorably to the law of fatalism, for they cannot evade the decease that the decree that has fixed the term of their existence, or the kind of death that must interpret its course. So the true fatalism that we have, the thing that is predetermined exactly, is our corporeal death. So that is true fatalism. In the law of fatalism, how that is predetermined, the day, the time, the location, how we're going to, everything, all that is predetermined. So death is absolutely unchangeable. We can't escape that. When it is our time, it's our time. And that's one thing that we don't have our freedom of choice, that we already have planned before. So we still have about 2 pages in this summary to go over, and we'll go over that next week. And then we're going to move on talking about the law of justice, love, and charity. So then we're going to talk about that after we finish summarizing up the law of freedom next week. But before we leave off this week, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone. For today's date, July 31st. In the race. I've got something inside me, peasant-like and stubborn, and I'm in it till the end of the race. We don't have to make elaborate, detailed plans about how we're going to lead our lives, although it's good to do some planning along the way. We can simply set a course and pledge to hang in there, whatever comes. This, in the end, is the most courageous and powerful thing we can say. I am here and I'm staying. Whatever life throws at me, I will not be stopped. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything at all you want to talk about, feel free to email me at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.